I was just talking to you in British Sign Language, or BSL. Now, it's generally agreed upon that BSL developed at some point during the 18th century. However, there is evidence of deaf communities in Britain using sign language from at least the 16th century. Unfortunately, the history of BSL can be quite difficult to track, as it's not really a written language. Most users also know English as a first or second language, and for convenience sake will use that when it comes to writing. It's safe to assume, though, that some form of sign language was used in the medieval period. And in fact, we have some tantalising records about one particular form of sign language that was in use from at least the 10th century. Its users weren't necessarily deaf, however. They were monks. Saint Benedict of Nursia wrote his Rule of Life in the 6th century. These guidelines for monks living communally became the foundation of Western monasticism, and, following the religious reforms of the 10th century, the regular Sancti Benedicti, or Rule of Saint Benedict, became the guiding tenets of British monasticism. The monks, known as Benedictines, would read a chapter from the rule every single day, and dedicate their lives to putting it into practice. The Rule of Saint Benedict, though strict, was not extreme, focusing on humility and the tenets of work and prayer, which is why it became so popular. Benedict, however, did have something to say on the subject of silence. In the 83 chapters that make up the rule, on keeping silent is chapter number 6. Now, in it, Benedict informs the reader that sometimes, for the sake of the virtue of silence, refrain even from good conversation. And he reminds the abbot that because of the great importance of keeping silent, permission to speak should be rarely given, even to exemplary disciples. Later, when discussing meal times in chapter 38, Benedict writes that, excepting the monk giving the reading, there is to be complete silence, and that whatever is wanted, the brethren should pass to one another, so that no one need ask for anything. He goes on to say that, if, however, something is wanted, it should be asked for by some sign or sound rather than by speaking. Silence is a recurring theme for Benedict, stating in chapter 42 that at all times monks ought to strive to keep silence, and constantly reminding the monks that things ought to be done in silence. Now, obviously, communal living would prove impossible if you didn't communicate to one another at all. And so, within the medieval period, there developed something that we call Monastic Sign Language. Studying Monastic Sign Language faces the same difficulty as studying the history of BSL. Very little was written down. However, there are some useful documents. The most fascinating of them is the manuscript Cotton Tiberius A3 from Christchurch, Canterbury. This document, dating from the mid-11th century, contains the Monasterialis Indica, the monastic signs. Written in Old English, it seems to be a way of introducing sign language to new members of the order who may not yet have a good grasp of Latin. Now, the list is by no means exhaustive, and there are a couple of errors on the part of the scribe, but looking at the Monasterialis Indicia gives us a fascinating glimpse into this historic language. The manuscript begins with a sort of who's who of a Benedictine monastery, explaining signs for the different senior monks. These include the abbot, and the provost, as well as the dean ringing his bell, and the cellarer turning the key to the cellars. There's also the master of the novices, which is a combination sign for looking after and small, and the sacrist, looking after, and the sign for church, ringing the church bells. After listing all the important people, the author moves on to all the different books and vestments that would be used during a divine service. The sign for the Gospels is to cross your forehead. For a psalter, the description is to stroke your left hand with your right finger, as though you are paying great attention. The signs for the different vestments are relatively straightforward, such as the alb, which is the same sign as clothes in general, the girdle, and the stole. Some are almost too literal, such as the sign for a small book of martyrs, or the signs for a rod, and a scourge. There are also more practical tips, like how to ask if you can sit down due to some infirmity. The author then moves on to the refectory, and the signs described give us a good sense of what Benedictines in England were accustomed to eating. This includes staples such as bread, vegetables, pottage, a kind of thick medieval stew, pepper, beans, cheese, butter, eggs, salt, and fish. The sign for apples and several other fruits are described, as well as how to ask if you can go to the toilets, and how to request salted meat, despite the fact that such a rarity was only allowed to those recovering from some ailment. From the refectory, the author moves to the dormitory. The sign for dormitory and clothes together would indicate bed covers. Whilst if you want to sign individual types of clothing, those are usually just mined, such as braise and hosen, which were essentially medieval underwear, as well as winningas, woolen leg wraps often worn whilst working, and gloves. Speaking of work, there are signs for some useful tools, such as scissors, needles, and quill. Finally, the author comes back to people, giving signs to denote those from outside the monastery, such as a nun, the king, or a layman, or woman. Now, it's safe to assume that this list is not exhaustive. There were probably signs for everything that a monk could think of, all in order to maintain that silence. It's also worth noting that this is not the only manuscript of monastic sign language. Other examples exist from France and Germany, and comparing them actually gives us a bit of insight into how British monasticism differed from that of the continent. For example, the French manuscript makes no mention of gloves or winningas. Perhaps they were added in order to accommodate the British climate. The French manuscript also places wine among the drinks that would be served at meal times, whereas the British scribe only has the sign for wine in the divine office. In fact, the very order in which the scribe has arranged the signs gives us an idea of English priorities. Senior management and religious observances come first, followed by food and sleep, and then work, and finally the people beyond the walls of the cloister. So how does Monasterialis Indicia relate to modern BSL? Well, it would have been the language used by many deaf people during the medieval period. Monks would go out to teach it to deaf members of their community. In fact, many deaf people would choose to join a monastery because the reliance on sign language made their lives a lot easier. It's also striking how similar some of the signs are to modern BSL. For example, fish and king are practically identical, while signs such as butter and clothes have barely changed. The medieval sign for refectory is the same as the BSL for food. The sign for cellarer is the same as the modern sign for key. And the sign for a layman, bearded so as to distinguish them from their clean-shaven monks, is used for man in BSL without any religious connotations. That shouldn't come as much of a surprise though. Many of the signs are intuitive. And we know from a 14th century manuscript found in Ely that a good deal of the signs remained unchanged over 300 years. Monasterialis Indicia would have been used all throughout the Norman period, and could well be the forefather of modern BSL still in use today. Thanks for watching. Farewell. Hey everyone, thanks again so much for watching. If you want to learn more about British Sign Language or even pick up some signs yourself, we're going to include some links down in the description, so check those out. It is definitely a skill worth having. If there's any other subjects that you want to hear us talk about more in future, please comment below. We are always looking for new ideas for our videos. But until then, I'll see you in our next video. Farewell!